I don't know about you, but I've been in a bit of a game rut lately. Maybe it's just the stage of life that I'm in. I've graduated from college and I've been working for a couple of years now. I've been trying to get my life together. It's been hard for me to be open to new experiences in games, and for some reason, the joy and excitement of playing a new game has been somewhat replaced with a sense of dread and exhaustion. But playing Oxygen Not Included has really changed this for me. I've played it for about a year now, and I'm rediscovering the joy of learning a new simulated world with all of its intricacies and mechanics and all the failure that comes with learning. I've always really loved games that have very complex mechanical systems. That's why I cover grand strategy games so extensively on this channel. But if there's another type of game that clicks with me, it's management survival games with heavy simulation elements. And recently, Oxygen Not Included has been scratching that itch for the first time in a long time. This isn't the first game I've played by Klei Entertainment. When their breakout game Don't Starve released in 2013, I was all over it. In fact, the first game review I ever wrote was for Don't Starve. When Oxygen Not Included came out in 2019, I somehow missed the boat and didn't end up starting to play until May of 2024. I was just not in a space where I could afford to spend time learning a brand new complicated game, or so I thought. When I first booted up Oxygen Not Included, it was a rare instance of a game instantly clicking for me. This almost never happens, probably because I love more hardcore style management experiences, where solutions to complex problems require a lot of game knowledge to solve them, and therefore aren't really fun until you learn a lot of that game knowledge.
And then Oxygen Not Included, which we've sold about 1 million copies now, which is really awesome because it is such a nerdy game. I feel like we've tricked 1 million people to do their homework or something, you know? It's just so fun.
The most played games in my library are full of games like this, from Europa Universalis to Civilization to Mountain Blade, Satisfactory, and most recently Songs of Six. All this is to say that I'm not new to the genre of games that take dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of hours to master. But I don't believe I've ever found a game in this category that so perfectly onboards you into its world and lets you learn at your own pace, solving problems that arise in a way that is constantly fun, even and especially when everything you built is falling apart.
So Oxygen Not Included is a space colony simulation game. So you basically manage a group of duplicants trying to survive this really, really terrible world. A fully simulated world where we simulate temperature, we simulate pressure. Typically what happens is you fail in miserable ways, but it ends up being pretty hilarious. Depending on your decisions, your base will feel sick. People have diarrhea, they'll go to the bathroom. They're gonna have a bad time and you're gonna feel it. The base is gonna look very different. The people are gonna act different, and it's gonna be a very different experience as opposed to when everything goes right.
Oxygen Not Included is a colony simulation survival game that takes the solo survival crafting experience and marries it with the popularity of the colony sim genre. The game has a distinct character that is uniquely Klei Entertainment, with a systems-based approach to every game mechanic that makes the world feel living and real thanks to emergent gameplay experiences and emergent system interactions. Survival in this game is a real challenge. The premise, which is clear just from the title, poses a unique survival challenge not usually found in other games. We've seen lots of games about avoiding starvation, including from Klei, and we've seen plenty of survival crafting colony sims. But I have never seen another game that forces you to manage gases and oxygen, and Klei pulls this off in a very rewarding way. Despite its somewhat hardcore nature, Oxygen Not Included is aesthetically inviting. Klei Entertainment has always had a unique approach to making their art feel inviting, intriguing, and charming in a way that is utterly uncommon in this gaming niche. Let's start with audio. Everything in Oxygen Not Included's audioscape pulls you in, from the ambience to the music and even the UI and what happens in the world. For me, audio is probably more impactful on my experience of cohesion in a game than graphics. That's likely because I play a lot of games where graphics are not the forefront. But Oxygen Not Included delivers a visual aesthetic experience that provides not just a world worth looking at, but character and charm to literally everything there is in this game. Nothing is dull, nothing is generic. Nothing in this game would fit in any other game. Oxygen Not Included knows its aesthetic identity and it fucking nails it. That's all the more impressive when you consider that this is a systems-based game with complex mechanics. They really didn't have to go so hard, but they did. Oxygen Not Included's aesthetic is reminiscent of Don't Starve's iconic 2D pen and paper, Tim Burton-inspired, cute but dark, nightmarish vibe. But the game remains distinct from its predecessor, partly because this is a science fiction game, not a dark fantasy, but also because of the difference in depth and scale that Oxygen Not Included operates within. Where Don't Starve's world was an isometric view of a flat 3D world with all 2D art, Oxygen Not Included's world is a side view of a 2D grid, just like the stick figures you drew when you were a child. The elimination of depth, the change of scale, and the new camera position makes this art style feel distinct from Don't Starve's world. And I really think it highlights a sense of smallness in the characters who make up your little colony. This initial smallness allows you to feel a huge amount of progress from simply growing your base, which will eventually span most of the map, and builds that progression into the visual language of the game. There's another element of game art and aesthetic that I want to highlight, which is the design of machines and dupes that makes them look cute and absolutely incompetent. Machines look cobbled together and amateurish, giving off a funny and unique visual feeling. Like, this stuff just screams thingamabob or doohickey. And the buildings are even named in that silly style, which is, again, an evolution of the style established by Don't Starve. Similarly, the creatures you'll encounter are all a mix of freaky and cute. I love this one in particular, the gassy moo. It looks like a manatee, right? Which is a sea cow, so a water moo. But this one floats in gas, so it's a gassy moo. All these elements combine into such a distinct aesthetic experience that really is unparalleled for a game of this type. I know I mentioned that already, but it really is true. If other strategy, simulation, and management games could accomplish this level of art direction, they would absolutely make it into more mainstream markets. It's not just about good graphics, it's also about having a distinct and inviting style that enhances the experience. Aesthetics are a really low priority of mine when evaluating a game, which is why I usually start by getting that part out of the way, but wow, does Oxygen Not Included's art design make it easy to praise at every level. This is a colony sim game, so let's talk a bit about your little colonists. Duplicates are what this game is all about. They are the little characters you are tasked with keeping alive and as happy as possible. Duplicates have many different designs that give each one just enough of a unique feeling, even though their stats are randomly generated. Each duplicate will have interests, which are stat increases they get for their skills in doing certain types of tasks, like digging, building, or farming. On top of that, they have a random set of traits, which can further alter their attributes, as well as giving them unique needs or other stats, including having to use the bathroom more often, being better at working at night, or being unable to sleep in a dark room. On top of attributes affecting performance at the various tasks around your base, duplicates also earn skill points from working that allow them to increase their attributes and unlock specific abilities. For example, investing a skill point into hard digging lets the duplicate dig materials that are a higher hardness tier. The drawback is that investing skill points adds to a duplicate's morale need. Duplicates will have interests, things they want to learn to do, and these don't cost any extra morale, but eventually you'll probably be teaching skills to a duplicate that they don't particularly want to learn. And just like how getting a promotion at work without a raise feels like a punishment, giving duplicates too many skills without enough comforts will make them stressed out and unhappy. Finally, each duplicate also has a stress reaction and an overjoyed response, which describe how they react to being at the maximum stress or at very high morale, respectively. The duplicates themselves are not overly unique in terms of mechanical difference, but they have just enough variety that they require some minor management, like having an illuminated bedroom for your duplicates who are afraid of the dark, or having multiple schedules so that your duplicates can make use of their nighttime productivity bonus on the night shift. You get the option to select from a few more available duplicates every couple of days, so you can almost always avoid traits you don't want to deal with. Of course, duplicates can die if their basic needs aren't met. They can starve, they can suffocate, they can freeze, they can burn to death. The stakes can be particularly high if you lose a lot of duplicates at once, which can trigger a chain reaction of collapsing systems and end the run in some cases. I think duplicates are great evidence of the way that the game brings in both a cozy and laid-back vibe, while also evoking themes of the brutality of survival in an uncaring world. Their descriptions in particular range from wholesome positivity to all too relatable postmodern anxiety. In this way, Oxygen Not Included is really a product of its time and fits just as well in 2025 as it did when it came out officially in 2019. It uses a dark, almost Gen Z style depression humor without the cringe lingo that would make the game dated after just 6 months, and comments on themes that occupy our minds a lot today, like how we're going to rely on technology to survive in an increasingly inhospitable planet, even as the technologies themselves are making the planet unlivable. But before we get into the existential themes, let's talk a little bit more about what survival means in Oxygen Not Included. The game starts you out in a small cave deep underground on some sort of planetoid, with nothing but some food rations and nearby oxalite, oxygen in mineral form that's dissolving, or more technically, sublimating into the air. With basic food and oxygen at your disposal, you're given enough time to set up a basic survival base before slowly ramping up your population and growing your colony and survival systems. Your duplicates have needs for you to fulfill so they can stay alive. You could probably guess what these are. They need to breathe, they need to rest, they need to eat, they need to use the bathroom, they need to maintain a healthy body temperature of 37 Celsius. Only burns, freezing, lack of food, and suffocation will actually kill a duplicate if it's bad enough, because duplicates will simply pee on the floor or pass out on the ground if they aren't able to use a bathroom or sleep in a bed. These needs, as basic as they are, become pretty difficult to fulfill when combined with a layering of interconnected systems in a highly complex simulated environment. Managing gases like oxygen and CO2 is probably the key differentiator that makes Oxygen Not Included distinct from other games in its genre. After the initial oxalite deposit has been completely used up, there will be no more oxygen in your small base. You'll have to create more of it with an oxygen diffuser, a machine which consumes algae and energy to produce oxygen. Throughout the game, there are many opportunities to generate oxygen from other sources. Algae deposits will eventually run dry and will have to be replenished by processing the much larger deposits of slime found in some biomes into algae, a process which takes a lot more energy to run multiple machines, more duplicate work time to keep those machines filled with materials, and on top of that, runs the risk of germ contamination. The slime is pretty germy, which is something we'll get back to in a bit. Of course, there are also a few industrial ways to create oxygen, each with their own problems. The rust deoxidizer is a machine that takes rust and salt and produces oxygen, iron, and chlorine gas. This is great, but you need to mine the rust out of the ground, and you need to do something about the chlorine, which is a big problem. Any gas in your base that isn't oxygen is kind of a problem, as duplicates will have to hold their breath in those spaces. Duplicates who are inside of chlorine for more than 3 seconds can get eye irritation, which reduces their athletics stat. At the same time, you can use chlorine to disinfect things because it kills germs. So just this one machine can have so many downstream and upstream implications in the little operational chain that your colony is working through. The chlorine example also illustrates the need to manage gases by moving them around the base. In the early game, it might be good enough to just pump oxygen into the air, but quickly it'll become necessary to be intentional with gas management, using pumps and vents and various filtration methods to Make sure gases go where you want them to go. You can also store gases, either in the world or in gas reservoirs. Another example of oxygen generation is the electrolyzer. The electrolyzer takes clean water and rips it apart into hydrogen, which can be used to generate power, and oxygen for your duplicants to breathe. The problem is, of course, that the oxygen comes out at a high temperature, at minimum 70 Celsius or 158 Fahrenheit for my fellow American contrarians. Clearly, that will require some cooling, which opens an entire can of worms and additional problems to solve. I think this already demonstrates how Oxygen Not Included's game loop works. Every problem you solve creates multiple downstream effects that will also need to be resolved eventually or immediately. Oftentimes, the downstream effect is a need to manage some new material, like a gas floating into the air, or a solid that a duplicant is going to have to move to the next stage of the process. But most often, the most pressing and universal downstream effect is that you're going to be using more energy. Every machine we've discussed so far requires power to operate. Power can initially be generated with little hamster wheels for your dupes to run on, called manual generators. These are great sources of energy because they are renewable, but they can have an opportunity cost in that while your dupes are running, they're not doing other tasks. Specializing dupes is a big part of managing the colony as a whole, and you can set certain dupes to exclusively operate the manual generators and similar machinery, as well as setting those to a high priority to encourage constant energy generation when needed. The problem is that energy demands will generally outpace what you can realistically produce with manual generators. Why? Well, because you need power to feed those duplicants while they're running on their little treadmills, and you need power for almost everything else in this game. Gas pumps, liquid pumps, oxygen generators, lights, crafting, refinery stations for materials, and even your research station to unlock new technologies. Power can be generated in many ways, and in fact, diversifying your energy sources can be such an essential component of any thriving colony. You never know when you're going to suddenly enter a crisis, and having multiple sources of energy can keep you afloat while you scramble to resolve your issues. A good example is using a coal generator as a backup power source via a smart battery. Smart batteries are part of the automation line of technologies you can unlock, which allows the application of logical conditions to your machines. In my case, I set the coal generator to not turn on unless the battery is close to running out. So this is being used as an emergency power supply, meaning that ideally other sources of power would have prevented your battery from getting this low. But if something else is going on that's preventing your dupes from getting to their little hamster wheels, or some other energy source is offline, you have this backup that will activate to make sure your oxygen production, food production, plumbing doesn't suddenly all shut off. When your colony's systems collapse all at once, it's usually involving power in some way, because power forms the basis of every other system of your base. This is also why getting plants or critters to produce things that make you less energy dependent is a major source of long-term sustainability, as you can conserve energy for use on projects that need it most. Long-term, one of the most problematic byproducts of power production is that it and the machines that use power generate heat. In a base that's sealed so that you can keep your oxygen in, heat is a major problem. If not managed well, it will build up until your crops start to fail from overheating, and eventually even your duplicants will start to complain about the high temperatures. I even had a duplicant die from burns in a recent run, though this was caused by a steam vent, not just like ambient heat. Luckily for you, food is not as difficult to produce and manage as oxygen and power. Early game food involves mixing water and dirt to produce, bars of mush. These mush bars will keep your duplicants alive, but their morale will remain low because the mush bars are disgusting. Still, mush bars are a solid food source until they can be replaced with better ones later on. Other food sources come from plants and critters. You can farm lots of edible plants, and you can raise animals for meat and eggs. Just like managing gases, nothing in Oxygen Not Included has a single purpose and no byproducts. In other words, in a game like Minecraft where wheat is only used to make food, and technically also animal feed, wheat doesn't link itself to other crafting systems with their own complex relationships. But in Oxygen Not Included, Hatches are fairly common critters that can be ranched for food, yes, but they also excrete coal, which can be used as an energy source in a coal generator. And that coal generator produces heat and CO2 that you have to manage, and so on. That is the beauty of how this game operates. Every system interacts with every other system. A skilled player will master not just each system individually, but will really have to understand how they all fit together using critters, plants, technologies, and other tools. Food can also be augmented by processing it further. The first example of this is fried mush bars, which are mush bars that have been cooked on an electric stove, requiring 2 different steps for duplicants to operate, as well as the additional energy expense of cooking the food twice. The reward is that mush fries give 1,050 calories, meaning that duplicants can get all the calories they need for one day in just that meal. And mush fries give a morale value of 0, making them better than the 800 calories and -1 morale that simple mush bars give. So, is it worth it? It certainly can be, depending on your situation. And if you want to raise morale to access additional skills for duplicants, you'll need to upgrade your food and eventually everything about your duplicants' living situations, like their beds and the decor of the base. We should also discuss polluted water and polluted oxygen. Both are basically just dirty variants of their clean counterparts with some interesting properties. Polluted water can be found in the world naturally, and also comes as a byproduct of duplicants taking a fat one in the bathroom, as well as some other sources. The thing about polluted water is that it doesn't have the same uses as clean water. Like everything in Oxygen Not Included, you have to manage your resources and learn to convert some resources into other ones depending on your needs. If you have tons of clean water available, you might not worry about what happens with your polluted water. But if you don't have that much clean water, you're gonna have to find a way to convert your polluted water by filtering it in a water sieve. That of course costs energy and duplicants filling the sieve with a filtration medium like sand. So polluted oxygen works a little differently. The major downside to polluted oxygen is that it promotes the spread of germs, allowing them to survive and infect duplicants. While polluted oxygen is breathable and dupes will survive in it, it will cause the yucky lungs disease in dupes, making them consume more oxygen and stopping their work to cough every now and then. You can convert polluted oxygen into oxygen using a deodorizer to filter it at 90% efficiency. Polluted water actually emits polluted oxygen as well, so this could potentially be a source of oxygen generation, though it does do it very slowly, at an average maximum rate of 30 kilograms per cycle for a completely full tile of polluted water. This means 2 tiles full of polluted water theoretically generate enough polluted oxygen to sustain 1 duplicant that breathes in oxygen at a base of 60 kilograms per cycle. But we also lose 10% due to the deodorizer, and the 30 kilogram per cycle is only the rate that you get at a full cell of polluted water. So realistically, you might need 3 tiles of polluted water to sustain 1 duplicant, at least for emergencies. We mentioned how polluted oxygen promotes disease, but what is disease? Well, diseases can technically be caused by excess light, excess radiation, extreme temperatures, and germs. Let's talk in particular about germs and their role in the chaotic interplay of systems that you have to balance. Germs need to be disinfected, either by duplicants directly or through the environment, such as in a vacuum chamber, in chlorine gas, by washing your hands at a sink, as well as very high or very low temperatures. The wide variety of methods that let you kill germs allows the game to provide players with so much flexibility in the approach they want to take to solve this kind of problem. You can craft medicines if you have the technology, a duplicant with the skill required, and the right resources to create the treatments. Because you need to already be prepared for the treatment to really administer it effectively, the best way to manage disease is, unsurprisingly, prevention. In general, an awareness of where germs originate and how they spread is essential to mitigating the threat that they pose, which can be severe. Germs are found on the surface of objects in the world, like slime, which is needed for generating algae if you run out. Bathrooms where duplicants piss are going to generate food poisoning germs, and most devastatingly, zombie spores can be found on spore kids, a type of plant that grows in the environment. Once a duplicant picks up some germs, it's very easy for them to spread all over your base, especially if you have a lot of polluted oxygen, which allows germs to thrive. I think it's notable that diseases don't kill duplicates. Instead, they actually use the game's systems to trigger your death in more interesting ways. A great example is zombie spores, which literally ended my most recent run. The disease gives a -10 debuff to every single attribute for 18 cycles, making your infected dupes slow and incompetent for such a long time that it's hard to ever recover if the disease spreads. In my case, it spread to about a third of the base before life support started to collapse. My food production broke down, and then we ran out of power, and ultimately most of my dupes died of starvation. I didn't have the medical infrastructure in place to deal with the contagion, but more importantly, I wasn't vigilant about the spore kid that triggered the disaster. The game doesn't hide information from you, but it's up to you to look and check and learn and adapt to that information. What's great about experiences like these is that you learn so much from them, which is a core part of how Klei designs their failure-oriented experiences.
We don't really design retention mechanics. That's not how I think about it. I think that I want the game to be deep enough that people have a lot to explore. And we tend to design for deep play and then come back the other way to try to teach other people how to get there.
Just like in a Souls-like game, your frequent and often humorous failure is basically just you not being good enough, and will always give you a learning moment that sparks future attempts when you get over the initial frustration. Unlike failing in other games, Klei's survival experiences, and especially Oxygen Not Included, can really make you feel joy when things are collapsing. I mentioned Minecraft earlier. When I die in that game, a normal game mind you, not hardcore or anything, I absolutely lose my mind out of frustration of the progress that I've lost. But somehow the investment loss of Oxygen Not Included failures come with a sense of meta progress that gives the game a roguelike feeling. You're the one leveling up your knowledge after every run, and the game meets your new skill level by constantly posing greater and greater challenges for you to overcome. The way this works is that the bigger your base is, the more inefficiencies and errors you can build up, and the more fragile your run ultimately is, meaning that every new milestone is challenging and rewarding in a unique way. At this point, we've looked at how the game teaches its mechanics through a cycle of trial, error, and repetition. So now let's talk about how that design connects to the game's themes to create what's known as an emergent narrative. If you're unfamiliar with the term, emergent narrative is the idea that stories can arise naturally from a player's interactions with the game's systems, rather than being told through scripted dialogue or cutscenes. In games built around complex interlocking mechanics, players often end up experiencing unique stories that emerge from how those systems react to their decisions and actions. These narratives are still developer designed, but they can be a lot more open-ended than traditional storytelling media, because they are ultimately authored by the player. The premise of Oxygen Not Included is that you're managing a colony of clones on an inhospitable asteroid that contains long-abandoned remnants of human technology created by the company called Gravitas. The game deals with a lot of themes that are typical of science fiction. You've got your futuristic technology, space exploration, human colonization of other planets, post-apocalyptic societal collapse, and a constant tension around human reliance on technology to survive. On top of its science fiction elements, Oxygen Not Included layers a genuine simulation of physics and chemistry in its world. The game operates on a two-dimensional grid, where each grid cell has a certain element inhabiting it, whether that's a solid, a liquid, a gas, or even nothing at all, a vacuum. These elements, these materials, they have properties just like elements in the real world. They have a density, a temperature, a melting point, and an evaporation point. They have a specific heat capacity and a thermal conductivity. And all these properties behave and interact to create a cosmic soup of interactions between materials that operates your little simulation. This is why CO2 will sink to the bottom of your base, while chlorine will rise to sit on top of the oxygen. It's why a lot of heat will leak out of your pipes if they are made out of gold, but very little will leak out if they are made out of sedimentary rock. Materials will convert into other materials automatically given certain conditions. Ice that you dig at -20 degrees and put into your storage will melt if it gets warm enough, and it'll spill out liquid water all over the floor since your storage boxes are only meant for solids. Elements even have different levels of light absorption, so some gases are more transparent than others. This system is consistent and reliable, and it's why the game can comfortably be called a simulation. It is simplified, of course, it's not real physics, but the game gives you a set of elements with physical properties that behave in ways that align with real-world physics at an abstract level. It's no coincidence that in Oxygen Not Included, run-killing mistakes are designed to be just that. Mistakes that you made as a player. In other words, you failed to properly use the technologies and systems at your disposal. You weren't killed in a fight against some other being. You were killed by the laws of physics themselves. If nothing else, this is the core of science fiction storytelling, exploring the relationship between humans, our technology, and our environments. Science is a method for learning about the world, yes, but it also carries with it a cultural ideology of humans trying to control nature, to bend it to our purposes. Oxygen Not Included creates a narrative experience that puts you in that position and breathes that thematic tension into the minute-to-minute gameplay decisions. But it's actually even cooler than that. And I'm not just saying that out of creative writing degree-fueled nerdy enthusiasm. Because this game is all about trial and error, and the player is actually put into a position that looks a lot like a crude version of the scientific method. You try one method to keep your duplicates alive, they die from running out of oxygen. You try another system for focusing so much on oxygen, but then you run out of food. On the third try, you balance both needs, and your duplicates run out of power. What you're doing here is experimenting with different approaches to interact with the game's laws of physics, as well as the needs of your colony to try to bend the world to reach your goals. You're fumbling around, trying different materials, different sources of energy, different combinations of plants and animals and machines to hopefully create a configuration that will delicately balance all the systems that keep your duplicates alive and happy. If we zoom out and look at the meta progression of a player across multiple runs, it's almost a scientific approach to gameplay through trial and error to determine information about the physical world and then apply that knowledge to benefit human life. It really is a masterpiece of emergent narrative design, since the narrative is the game and still fits so perfectly within the game's more explicit themes, like futuristic technologies and humans living in space. Exploration is almost always a core aspect of survival games. These two gameplay experiences, survival and exploration, go hand in hand because their motivations are almost always intertwined. There's nothing more human than wanting to explore new things. And oftentimes this comes from our desire to improve our lives, or at least to see if there is something better out there. A desire that, at its core, is motivated by our goal to survive. In Oxygen Not Included, exploration involves a lot of digging. You start deep underground, and because of the nature of the game, you'll have to navigate the world not just by looking out for physical threats, but also paying attention to gases, liquids, temperatures, and germ threats when exploring new areas. The reward for exploring is survival. If you want to make it, you'll need the resources that can only be found by going deeper into the unknown places lurking just outside your field of vision. A key element that reinforces the sense of discovery is Oxygen Not Included's use of procedural generation. Each new colony spawns in a uniquely generated asteroid, with resources, biomes, and hazards arranged differently every time. This means that players never truly master the world. There's always an element of uncertainty waiting beneath the next layer of rock. The unpredictable layouts do have some obvious patterns in the form of biomes, but you still won't know where to find the biome you're looking for. This makes every run a fresh exercise in adaptation, mirroring the game's core experience of experimentation. Klei demonstrated the strength of their exploration design in Don't Starve back in 2013. also a survival experience, that game designed its tension around the fear of the unknown and the exploration of dangerous new environments. And just like a lot of things about Oxygen Not Included, its exploration design seems to come from an evolution of Don't Starve's experience. Feeling like an outsider in a world where you don't belong is another theme that Klei hammers home in this game and its predecessor. While Don't Starve feels like a fantastical nightmare, Oxygen Not Included brings the dread of being trapped in space, trapped underground with limited air, and trapped in a bunker where your safety is always dependent on gathering resources outside of your comfort zone. In both games, knowledge of the world's behavior is key to navigating its threats, and Oxygen Not Included provides lots of tools for the player to avoid threats posed by new parts of the world. Oxygen masks and Atmos suits provide duplicants with portable oxygen that they can bring with them to inhospitable environments, but you still have to watch out for extreme temperatures and the threat of germs. The world isn't trying to kill you, it's just that your fragile little duplicants really aren't meant for this environment and are prone to death. Oxygen Not Included is an absolute gem in a time full of generic, cookie-cutter survival crafting and management for the sake of management. The game's systems go deep. Its simulation is a joy to interact with. Its art direction is beautiful and its aesthetic design is both thematically relevant and mechanically appropriate. And most impressively, its themes and narratives hit home for me in a way that is really rare for these types of open-ended experiences. The charming, macabre Klei aesthetic, the personalities of the dupes, the relentless survival systems, the process of fumbling and learning through science, the careful orchestration of colony management, and the joys and costs of exploration all converge in a single, coherent experience. Each element informs the others, creating a simulation where charm draws the player in and complexity keeps them engaged. I think the game's success lies in this tension. The aesthetic style feels inviting rather than forbidding, and yet you encounter environmental forces that remind you just how fragile life is. In Oxygen Not Included, every breath is earned. Every machine you build, every cavern you explore, represents a small victory against a fully simulated world that is completely indifferent to your existence. How do we adapt to a world that is constantly changing around us? When the systems we build begin to fail, will we pretend nothing is wrong, or will we dig deeper, experiment, and ultimately, will we survive? If you'd like to support the channel, consider doing all the channel supporting activities you already know. Klei actually recently announced a new game that looks a lot like Oxygen Not Included, but with a single player experience and without the colony sim aspects. I was gonna write a little bit about that, but we really don't have much to go off of. So if you know this channel, you know I don't like to speculate. It's called the Away Team, and I'll definitely be covering that when it comes out. This video was the smoothest production of a video I've ever done. I seem to have figured out what my process is finally. With Europa Universalis 5 coming out in just a couple weeks, I'm probably going to be locked in on that project for a few months. And in the meantime, special thanks goes to my supporters on Patreon. Thanks for watching.